That's right, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Bobby LaMarco, and coming up on today's show, we're going to discuss 5 must-have sleepers you got to stash at the end of your rosters heading into 2023. Before we do, we want to make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And of course, make sure you jump over to razzball.com to get all what you need to win your fantasy leagues. But today's show, top 5 must-have sleepers, starting right now. And speaking of, I don't even think you're a sleeper. So at this point, we already you're a stud. He's like a top 5 pick. You're not a sleeper, but it's Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down. No on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
I was a sleeper like an hour ago. It's morning here where I am. So woken up, ready to go, excited for a big weekend. Last weekend of the preseason. Going to see if anything happens. Going to see if teams are trotting out their third teams. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. But it's all going on at the moment.
That is fantastic. Now, Ben, I got to tell you something. Ben, if you don't know Ben, and if you watch Razzball, you should know him by now. He's here every Friday with me, hanging out. But Ben lives in Australia. So Ben I've actually started doing a lot of slow drafts with Ben. We're in a couple of leagues now together. And I got to call this out. I am literally Ben's fairy godmother when it comes to fantasy football slow drafts, because not only in one league, but now a second league, I have suggested that we give Ben a little extra time because I know he was sleeping when the clock started. So I just want to let you know, Ben, I'm like, it's only for fantasy football purposes and slow drafts specifically, but I'm basically your first round fairy godmother because I don't let them auto pick for you, my friend.
I know. Look, you got to have someone who's got your back, eh? It made me laugh this week because I did one of my home league drafts, and you know, on one of the draft wizard things, it tells you which expert most aligned with your draft, and obviously it had me at the top of my own draft, so not shocking. But then it had you next, and I'm like, oh gosh, we're like magically aligning all of a sudden.
I love it. I love to hear it. And speaking of, by the way, if everyone's excited, we're probably going to have a Razzball Writer League, 16-team league going on right now, and I heard a rumor you had the number 1 pick. Who'd you take?
Oh, look, that's the real question, isn't it? No, look, it's one of those weird leagues where it's PPR. And usually in a PPR league, I'm still going McCaffrey first most of the time, but it's got 3 wide receiver slots plus 2 flex spots. And in PPR, you're usually going to start wide receivers in your flex spots. So I went Justin Jefferson. Now, I know a lot of people are like, of course you went Justin Jefferson. But the reality is that in most leagues, I'm going to go CMC, but Jefferson's the guy when there's so many wide receiver spots for me.
And Jamie, shout out to Jamie. He's just letting us know that Ben, you're not the only Australian, all right? Yeah. There's other people in the fantasy football. It's all good, and we appreciate that as well. Now, the breaking news before we get into our 5 must-have sleepers is that Trey Lance recently got traded to the Dallas Cowboys, now the backup for Dak Prescott, which is an interesting trade after how good Cooper Rush looked last year as the backup, winning games with them. So what's your quick thoughts, gut reaction to the trade from the 49ers to the Cowboys for Lance?
It's weird. Like, I don't really understand why they're doing that. Like, I thought Cooper Rush looked absolutely fine. I oddly enough have Cooper Rush in a 32-team league where I also have Dak Prescott, so it's really inconvenient for me now that I now don't back up. So emotionally, I feel negative about it, but it also just feels like a bit of a waste of a 4th-round pick. I feel like I don't even know that the 49ers wanted to keep 3 quarterbacks. They kind of just got away with getting something out of one of them when they really didn't need to. I feel like there are teams that needed him a whole lot more, and there are better quarterbacks they could have gotten as a backup as well. I just don't really understand it personally.
It would have been fun if you went to like Atlanta or the Bucks, a team that, where it could be more of a competition. Dak just got paid, so he's locked in. So it is what it is. I don't care. Today's about a happy day. Today's talking about some sleepers. Now, Ben, me and Ben got into the lab and we decided to talk about some guys going extremely late in fantasy football. Now, these are guys clearly going way after pick 120, which is a 10th round in a 12-team league. These guys are going 150, 160, 170, even higher than that, later than that. So today is really not just a must-have sleeper show, but it's deep sleepers, guys you could typically get with your last 2 picks. Now, before we dive into our individual players, Ben, what do you look for in your last pick? You know, let's just assume that you already got a defensive kicker and you already got those things. But what is like your ideal like guy you're just going to pluck, see what happens type player?
So firstly, I'm taking these guys in the third last round because I'm always taking my DST and kicker in the last 2 rounds because that's just how I roll. However, what I'm looking for is upside. Realistically, at the bottom of your bench, there's no point having a guy who's better than all the other guys, assuming that they all play. None of them are going to end up in starting lineups most weeks. So you want the guy that with the highest chance of ending up in the starting lineup. So even if there's only a 10% chance he's going to end up in your starting lineup, when he's there, you want him to have a really good role. So we're looking at guys who either are going to need an injury, but if they get an injury, they're going to be really explosive, or alternatively, guys who are in a role in an offense that hasn't traditionally been considered particularly good. But if it just really clicks this year, then suddenly going to be fantasy gold. So it's all about that upside. We don't care about floor. These guys have 0 floor, but they all have a lot of upside.
I honestly think you should stop caring about floor probably like round 9, 10 anyway. Like at that point, you're not going to lose your fan. Like it's the opposite of the first 5 rounds, like where you should care about floor because you kind of almost want safety to make sure you're getting some established points. But once you get to like the 10th round, forget the floor, baby. Let's go. Like all ceiling. And that's why I'm excited about some of these guys today. And the best part is we got a little running back, we got a tight end, we got a couple of receivers. So whatever floats your boat, we got. So let's get into it. At number 5, you actually have a rookie. And it's not a rookie that I don't think a lot of people are going to think of right away. It's Luke Musgrave. Currently, I do not have him ranked in my top 150. ADP has him at 188. So, Ben, tell us why you think he's a must-have sleeper in 2023.
Look, if you don't know who Luke Musgrave is, he was the 42nd overall pick in the NFL draft, which is pretty high. Like we're talking early 2nd round draft. And most years, I think he'd be a 1st round pick. He's a really good tight end out of Oregon State. I think the fact is that this is a really strong tight end draft. There's probably 5 really good tight ends that all could have been legitimate 1st round picks in their own right if they've been taken in a different year. And it just happened that Musgrave slid a little bit. He went to the Packers, and I know what you're thinking, the Packers, oh, you don't want a tight end from the Packers. We've seen guys like, Josiah DeGuara and things like that leading the way for their tight ends. They usually cycle their tight ends, and they tend to use a real tight end committee with guys like Mercedes Lewis and stuff like that. But Aaron Rodgers is out, and they're changing that system a lot. And then going back to what they used to do, a lot of people would probably forget who the tight end 3 was in 2020. It was Robert Tonyan with the Packers. And as it turns out, he's not very good. Like, even though he managed to be the tight end 3, I think we've since discovered he's really just a backup tight end. So we're taking someone with a lot of talent and putting them into that situation where a backup quality tight end managed to thrive and become the overall tight end 3 in the season. Now, Musgrave is very talented. He's a good blocker. He's played 5 years at college. He's NFL ready. And they've made it really clear they're going to give him an every down starting role. DeGuara's moved to a fullback role, which means that he's not threatening the starting position of Musgrave at all. And their backup is also a rookie in Tucker Kraft, who they took in the 3rd round, but it's clearly Musgrave who's the starter. So he's going to be an every down tight end, which isn't true of the majority of tight ends in the league. And he's going into a situation where they don't really have a clearly established wide receiver 1, and they certainly don't have clearly established wide receiver 2s and 3s. So there's going to be a lot of targets available as well. He's the kind of guy that you can stash and take into really late rounds. And if it doesn't work after a week or 2, you just yank him. Like it's fine. You're not losing anything by putting him on your roster. And he's excellent if you're taking those late round tight ends and just want to speculate a little bit.
So, quick question from Jamie: Musgrave or Gesicki if you're on the clock with the last pick?
Well, Musgrave's my tight end 16, and Gesicki is my tight end 32. So for me,
close.
Also, this part. For me, I think Gesicki is going to be on the field maybe 30% of snaps or something like that, and he's probably going to be in real like passing down situations. Hunter Henry's the guy in New England, but I don't want him either. Realistically, we know that Musgrave's got the upside there.
So when it comes to Luke Musgrave, I just think with the last pick, there's a lot of things going against him. It's the rookie tight end thing. It's the Jordan Love question mark thing. It's I know you said there's a lot of uncertainty with competition with targets, and you're not wrong there. But like Watson, Dobbs, Reed, Aaron Jones, these guys all, except for Dobbs, who's actually outplayed his 5th round draft cap already. There's some good draft value in those guys too. So especially Watson, Reed, and Aaron Jones is established. Call me crazy. I'd rather take Logan Thomas. I'd rather take a guy like that who, there's something about the usage in the preseason. The tight end has been going out on a lot of routes, and it just seems like they're kind of holding Logan Thomas out because they might use him. I know there's a lot of competition there. When I take a late round flyer, I just don't like rookie tight ends. They always just don't do it. I do admit in Dynasty, I feel like this is like an underrated pick because he might outperform the other tight ends that people are taking ahead of him because, listen, the Matt LaFleur offense is directly linked to the Kyle Shanahan offense. And when you think Kyle Shanahan, you think George Kittle. So it's not that the tight end position can't flourish in this offense. It's just that they haven't had a every down, good pass catching tight end. You could go probably back since they've been there. And like you said, Tanya had a very productive season. So any final thoughts about Musgrave before we move on?
Yeah, look, we do talk about rookies as really struggling in their as tight ends. Like tight end rookie seasons do tend to be pretty poor, but that's because of their blocking. A lot of them really struggle to block. Musgrave's an excellent blocker. He loves blocking. He's a very willing blocker. And I think the fact that he's a good blocker means he's going to be on the field all the time. It's more of a usage issue rather than taking time to establish to the speed of the league issue. Most of the time, the coaches just aren't willing to put him on the field. He's going to be put on the field. They've signaled that very clearly in preseason. And I think the fact he's going to be on the field says a lot. The reason I've got him ahead of someone like Logan Thomas is if we knew Logan Thomas was definitely the starter and was going to be the whole season, I think he'd be really clear-cut as being well higher up above Musgrave. But I'm really nervous about Cole Turner with Logan Thomas, which is why I think he has good upside. But I think Musgrave is more likely to reach his upside than Thomas is.
All right, let's jump down to the next one. Number 4, it's Van Jefferson. So when I'm putting this together, I'm thinking there's 2 questions I need to answer. Number 1, is Van Jefferson any good? And number 2, is there actually a role behind Cooper Kupp that could be fantasy relevant? Let's answer the first question. So Van Jefferson, after his rookie year in 2020 and 2021, he made a second-year leap. And I think a lot of people forget that. In his first season, he only had 31 targets and went to 89. Receiving yards, 220 to 802. Touchdowns, 1 to 6. He finished as the wide receiver 52 that season, averaging just under 10 PPR points per game. His current ADP is wide receiver 70. So just from there, he offers some value if he could get back to those levels. However, everyone's like, well, what happened to him? Well, he had that knee injury. He played through a knee injury at the end of the 2021 season. In 2022, he started having off-season surgeries, and then he had complications. Then he had a resurgery, and then he missed a bunch of time in 2022. He basically missed Matthew Stafford. I don't even think he played with Matthew Stafford last year. So I honestly feel like, okay, now that he's officially healthy and removed from the knee injuries, it's like, okay, so I think that if you get him back to where he was just back in 2021, he's already a value based on what we've seen. However, let's decide on the role. Allen Robinson was a dumpster fire last year. We admit that. But if you actually look at Allen Robinson weeks 1 through 5 for the first 5 games versus his last 5 games, there's a different story that you can see. His targets go from 4.6 to 5.8. His fantasy points go from 5.7 to 11.2. So 11.2 PPR points per game, that's wide receiver 40. That's Brandon Cooks last year. So it did take some time. Remember, Allen Robinson was the new guy. He was learning the offense coming in. So right there, the role was solid. And if you just go the year before that, Robert Woods was the wide receiver 23 before his injury. So there is a clear wide receiver 2 need in this offense. And I know Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell are like the other 2 guys, but really? Tutu Atwell is 100 pounds. And he actually looked good down the stretch last year too. But I think Van Jefferson's the number 2. And if I'm going to take a shot on Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford. I think those guys are being overlooked this year. Sean McVay was a genius just 2 years ago who won a Super Bowl. Matthew Stafford was a Hall of Fame passer, wins a Super Bowl, and now all of a sudden they're just terrible. We don't want anything to do with them. Please, in the last round, I'll take a shot on Van Jefferson. What's your thoughts, Ben?
I totally agree. The reality is that you want wide receivers in offenses that are going to have to throw the ball. And the reality is that the Rams defense is not what it used to be. I know it's still got Aaron Donald, but the secondary and especially their linebackers are terrible. Every single one of their linebackers is an undrafted free agent. And most of them are undrafted free agents from this year. It's really concerning. They've got a real lack of quality in their defense, especially around the middle there. And that means that they're going to give up a lot of points. If you're giving up a lot of points, you're going to have to chase those points somewhere, and they're going to have to chase them through the air because realistically, they're not going to be able to run Cam Akers all day and score a whole lot of points. Matthew Stafford is capable of doing that, but he's going to have to throw to somebody, and Cooper Kupp's going to get a lot of targets. We both love Cooper Kupp if he's healthy. But the reality is that Van Jefferson's the second guy. They've signaled throughout preseason that Atwell and Nakua are kind of fighting for that third slot, and they both play that similar role. They're both very small speed guys. But Jefferson's the guy who's going to get a lot more targets. He's the reliable outside wide receiver guy. I think it's a really clear role. I think there's a lot of upside there. And the reality is we don't know how healthy Cooper Kupp is. And he's with hamstring injuries, they can re-aggravate a lot. So if Kupp gets re-injured, suddenly Van Jefferson's the wide receiver one in that offense, and he's going to get even more targets. So I think there's real upside here, and I love the idea of taking him late in drafts.
You had me up until the Cooper Kupp stuff. I don't want that bad juju out there, okay? Like, I love Cooper Kupp. I'm very high on him this year. Let's just keep that juju. Everything Ben said up to that point, perfect. Until then, let's just leave Cooper Kupp out of it, all right? He's going to be fine. Nothing's ever going to happen to him. He's going to be great. Stafford's going to be great. I'm excited. Let's move on to another rookie who, by the way, has really shined in preseason. His usage has been great. It's Michael Wilson, the Cardinals wide receiver. I do not have him in my top 150, but I do like this kid. His ADP is 235. So talk about just a late round dart throw. Tell us why you're in on Wilson as a last round pick in 2023.
Yeah, look, the way they've used him in preseason has been very clear-cut. He is the starter. He's the outside starter opposite Marquise Brown. Now, we know Hollywood Brown's really good, and he will be the wide receiver one in this offense, but there's space for others as well. Rondale Moore will be involved as well, but he was only getting used in 3 wide receiver sets during the preseason. They weren't allowing him on the field outside 11 personnel. So that means that Wilson's going to be the every down guy. He's a good blocker, which means they can leave him out there for running downs as well. And occasionally you throw on running downs. So there's a couple of extra targets there as well. He was a 3rd round pick, which is in that kind of area where you can feel okay about taking a rookie. Rookies drafted in the 3rd round do often go okay. It's not as good as the 2nd or 1st round rookie, but there's at least a history of players having success, having been drafted in the 3rd round and being a rookie. And the reality is that when Marquise Brown was the only other one playing and there were no others, when Hopkins was still suspended, they were giving Dortch like double-digit fantasy points. He's not going to be playing now. It's going to be Wilson. So Wilson has that opportunity of getting double-digit points. When Brown was out, Moore and a couple of others were all getting double-digit points. The reality is you're going to get 2 or 3 wide receivers in this offense getting double-digit points. Now, I understand that Kyler Murray is injured, and we have no idea what's going on with their quarterback. Presumably, it's Colt McCoy. It could be. Did I see that Josh Dobbs is going there now? I assume that's more as a backup situation. They've got a rookie in there. I'm not buying that either. But the reality is, whoever's there is going to have to throw the ball. Their defense is really poor as well. It's the same situation as the Rams. So you want the wide receiver too on these pass-heavy offenses, and I think this is going to have to be pretty pass-heavy. It's the same reason I want James Conner. They're going to have to use him a lot. They're going to have to pass the ball a lot, and that gives Wilson enough value to at least speculate on him.
The quarterback situation just kind of makes me a little uneasy right now, because the other thing about Drew Petzing, the new OC, is that we know they're going to use a lot of 2 tight end sets. We saw it with the Cleveland teams under Kevin Stefanski. They use a lot with Njoku, with Harrison Bryant. Then they had Austin Hooper there for a while. I do believe he passed Rondale Moore, which is great. But I don't, as much as I like, we talked a little bit of Colt McCoy, about Colt McCoy. He's like a solid 200 yards passing guy who's going to operate the offense and slow down the game and keep the games close, probably not have too many turnovers type guy. And when you already have Marquise Brown there, and then you also have Trey McBride, Zach Ertz coming back from injury, we're not sure what that situation is going to be. And then you also have that Rondale Moore, who might not be an every down player, but they do manufacture touches for that guy. And then James Conner already is a good pass catching running back. I'm just for this season only. I'm all in on dynasty. Like your sleepers are like some of my favorite dynasty guys. But last year, for example, Drew Petzing, the number 2 wide receiver in that offense, was Donovan Peoples-Jones, and he was the wide receiver 53 in PPR points per game. So, and then before that, it was awful. It was like way lower. So I think long term, if they can figure out the quarterback situation, I think the Drew Petzing offense, like it makes me, I think the upside could be like Diggs and Thielen, like when they were like in their primes, and you could have Wilson and Brown. And I think there is a scenario where that can happen, but I just don't see it for 2023. But final thoughts about Wilson before we move on.
I mean, I think there's also the possibility, and we've seen it happen a lot, that Brown gets injured. And if that happens, then suddenly you've got a guy who's definitely going to be target heavy. You take him in the last round for a reason. It's because he's got upside, not because it's likely to happen. I think it probably won't. I think the reality is that probably he's the kind of guy that you're going to drop after 4 to 5 weeks. But if it clicks, or if Brown gets injured, then all of a sudden he's a definite starter for me. I could imagine him easily being a top 20, top 30 wide receiver, depending on the situation and how they use him, and especially if Brown gets injured. Because realistically, you're not going to use him otherwise on your bench anyway. So you might as well take someone with upside, as opposed to a lot of the other people that people are taking who we know are going to be like a wide receiver 70 or something like that.
So I guess my thought process with that statement is I think the wide receiver handcuff is kind of an underrated philosophy to take. Like, if you know that going into week 1, we're probably the likelihood that Wilson goes for like 5 for 70 is probably slim, especially with the Dobbs, Colt McCoy situation, whatever they're trying to figure out there. So I guess my thought process is instead of taking a last round pick on him and maybe you go after someone that has maybe more week 1 upside, but he's a name, if you do see Marquise Brown get banged up, that because a lot of people don't think of wide receivers as a handcuff that you prioritize in waivers that week. You put some extra fab down on him that week because you're like, I know that his role is going to go off the charts. Is that a philosophy you've ever employed, or are you just like, hey, I'm going to put him on my bench, see what happens? I don't really care about week 1 necessarily.
I think it really depends who else is available and how deep your league is. If you're playing in a league where you've only got 2 wide receiver spots and 1 flex, and you've got a normal 5 or 6 man bench, the reality is he's going undrafted and he shouldn't even be close to being drafted. But if you're playing in a league with like 3 wide receiver spots and 2 flex spots, and you've got a pretty deep bench of 7 or 8 players, all of a sudden you're needing to fill that bench with somebody, and you're better off filling it with somebody who's at least going to be on the field most of the time. So there's the chance he just clicks and looks really good. Plus, if there's an injury ahead of him, he also has a lot of upside. So there's kind of a couple of ways he can access that upside. And I like the fact that that's available to him. So I'd take him if I'm in a deep league, not if I'm in a pretty shallow league. I think there's a lot of better players available around that, wide receivers 50, 60, 70 range. He kind of comes off in the, mid to late 60s for me. Okay.
All right, let's jump down to the next one. If you haven't noticed a theme, it's the New York Giants this year. And I swear to you, this is not a homer pick. It is. There's reasons behind it. But yeah, I like the Giants. I like the Giants. Every episode I've talked about a Giants over the last few weeks has been Waller, Daniel Jones, now it's Parris Campbell. Current rank, I have him at 126. His ADP is 198. So I think the biggest thing for me is it's all about Daniel Jones. And as a Giants fan, if you've watched them closely, his rookie season, Daniel Jones showed a lot. He was very good his rookie year under Pat Shurmur. And then all of a sudden the Giants are like, oh my God, Daniel Jones, you're good. We're going to fire your coach and we're going to bring in Jason freaking Garrett and Joe Judge. Cool. Sweet. That worked out so freaking well. We delayed this kid's prime by 3 years by doing that dumb shit. Okay. But when you watch back that rookie year, he had multiple receivers averaging 12 PPR fantasy points or more. It was Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, and Darius Slayton. So this kid was balling out with these other receivers. So I think he could support more than one guy. He's proven to do that when there's competent offense around him. But it's also the role Parris Campbell's going into. I know Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson are still on the roster. Wan'Dale is probably the future at the slot, and I get all that. But they're not rushing those guys. They're trying to win now. The Giants proved enough last year. That's why they went out and got Parris Campbell. So the Cole Beasley role is probably the role he's going to take over. So Cole Beasley's 17-game pace from years 2019 to 2021, his 3 main years with the Buffalo Bills, was 120 targets. That's a pretty nice target count for him. Now, if you apply Parris Campbell's career catch rate, yards per target, and touchdown rate to those targets, he comes down to around 11 PPR points per game. That would have been wide receiver 40 last year. So that's not bad. That's wide receiver 4 numbers. Now, the question is there upside? And I think there is. The number 2 option, which I think he could become. I know Darius Slayton's also on my top 150. I actually am higher on him too, but it's more of like, we don't know who the number 2 is going to be yet behind Waller. So it's like, take both, see what happens type philosophy. I know that's not a great one, but hey, anyway, but the number 2 option for the Bills during that time frame, which Cole Beasley essentially was, finishes the wide receiver 34, the wide receiver 27, and the wide receiver 40. So wide receiver 27 to 40 in those 3 seasons. Okay, that's pretty good. That's like at the price point you're paying, you could potentially get a high-end wide receiver 3 to a mid-range wide receiver 3 is pretty good. So that's why I'm like really intrigued. And plus the preseason, guy saw 3 targets basically on the only drive he played all preseason. Gets 3 targets right behind Darren Waller. So I'm buying. I'm all in. I have him as a player that I want almost on every team. What's your thoughts about Parris Campbell?
Look, we're together on the train to Paris. I've been on this train all preseason, honestly. I've got the receipts. When we talked about Isaiah Hodgins, go back and watch that. I was talking about Parris Campbell. No, I truly believe that Parris Campbell is going to be a big part of this offense. The reality is that even though we think of him as being a slot guy, in his first year, he was almost entirely an outside receiver. So there's no reason once Wan'Dale Robinson comes back in that Parris Campbell can't slide outside and we don't have to hear about Isaiah Hodgins ever again. The reality is that Campbell's really good and he's going to be on the field regardless of how they choose to use him. And they can cycle him through. Even if Sterling Shepard comes in and cycles through the slot and outside, I think he's getting a little bit old now, so he's probably not going to be heavily involved. But even if they cycle him through, Campbell's going to be on the field the vast majority of the time. And so will Darius Slayton. I want both of these guys. I'm going to a draft for my home league directly after this. And I hope none of them are watching, but I'm drafting both of these guys. I will take Slayton and Campbell because they fall so late in drafts. So especially if you've got those 3 wide receiver slots and 2 flex spots I talked about earlier, these are the perfect guys to have like 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 on your bench as your wide receivers because you know at least one of them's going to click. The reality is at least one has to, possibly both. And all of a sudden you've got guys that you can just slide in as that 3rd wide receiver slot. They're very safe. You're going to they're going to have to use them. I know there's Barkley and Waller there, but the reality is this is becoming a pretty good offense to have. It's a playoff quality team. And the reality is in those sort of teams, you want all of the skill position players, and Campbell's one of those. So I'm definitely taking him as well. I'm high on Parris Campbell.
And the other thing, just about Slayton too. Slayton came in at the same year that Daniel Jones in 2019. His rookie season, Slayton was very good. 84 targets, 740 yards, 8 touchdowns that season. So listen, as a Giants fan, you know that the Jason Garrett experience and the Joe Judge experience, when they did the like QB sneak on their own 10-yard line when it was 3rd and 8, was like the epitome of horrible offensive play calling. Like, I can't. Anyway, let's move on before I get upset. All right, let's get to number 1. It's Jaylen Warren. You could right now today I have him at 136. His ADP is 143, so I'm in on him too. The question is like, how high do we take this kid, knowing he's probably definitely going to be the 1B or 2 behind Najee Harris? What's your thoughts, Ben? Why is he a must-have sleeper in 2023?
So my policy with drafting running backs has always been up until like running back 30, 35 roughly, you just look for their usage and you look for the players who are getting used and you draft them based on usage, and you either draft them early if you're going to go early running back, or if you're not, there's a couple of guys you can take around 30 to 35, guys like Brian Robinson and stuff who aren't very exciting, but you haven't drafted anyone else, so you need to have someone in there to start. You then fill your bench with upside. There's no point filling a bench with someone like Jerick McKinnon these days, because the reality is the upside isn't there. He's just a passing down back. He's going to have big games, but the reality is you don't know when to use him. You want to fill your bench with guys where if there's an injury in front of them, they're going to get massive usage. And the reality is that that's happening for a whole lot of running backs this year. There's guys like A.J. Dillon. There's guys like Jack Charbonnet. There's guys like Elijah Mitchell, where if they get an injury in front of them, all of a sudden they become a really useful running back starter. The thing that separates Jaylen Warren for those guys is that he's going to get used already. We've seen during the preseason that the Steelers haven't been willing to leave Najee Harris out for more than 2 snaps in a row. They keep cycling Jaylen Warren in. For the most part of last season, Najee Harris took all of the first downs and Warren would come in as a change of pace role or on passing downs. They've stopped doing that. later on in the year, they started to bring Warren in on a lot more first downs, realizing that he can break off plays. This is turning a lot into the sort of Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard situation, and Jaylen Warren is the Tony Pollard. He's really talented. He's very explosive. He's a bit small, but not so small that he can't be used in an every down role. The reality is that I'm probably taking him as my running back 35 at the moment. And I'll take him even earlier if necessary because I want him on my bench because I know that in a bye week, I can put him on and know that he's probably going to get at least something to get me by. But if there's an injury to Najee Harris in front of him, then he's going to be explosive. He's going to have real running back one potential. They want to use this as kind of a thunder and lightning situation. And I think we've seen that you kind of want the younger lightning guy in that situation because he's got a lot more upside. In best ball, he's amazing. But in any league, the reality is that you want Jaylen Warren on your bench. He's probably getting to the point where he's nearly not even a sleeper now. You might need to start reaching for him a little bit.
All right. So, Frodo, I saw your comment. We're going to get to your question. I'm just going to comment on Jaylen Warren really quick. But I do got to share my screen for a second because this is just getting weird now. Everything's getting kind of weird. So I just want to share my screen really quick. And here we go. All right. So you're going to look at the top of your screen here, and it says Jaylen Warren gives me Tony Pollard vibes. I did not just write that. That has been written in my notes. And so, I mean, I think we got to take a couple weeks off. Things are getting a little weird now. We're like basically
we're mind melding. There's something going on.
Nuts. Yeah, no, I agree. I think the other aspect of this though is that Tony Pollard didn't really take off until year 3, and this is second year for Jaylen Warren. So, and Najee's also a little younger than Zeke was, so I do hesitate a little bit, but I do get some of that 2021 Tony Pollard vibes before the true breakout. That season, he was the RB40, 10.4 PPR points per game. He started getting more and more usage, but he didn't have that big-time role yet like he saw in 2022. I think that there is an expedited timeline. I don't think Jaylen Warren's going to get 106 opportunities this year. I think he's going to be closer to like the 150, 175 range that Pollard got to in year 3. So I agree with this. Matt Canada also, I've brought this up a million times. He's very confusing to me. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know if he has dirt on Mike Tomlin and the Steelers front office. They're like, we have to give this guy a job because he'll out us for being some horrible people. I don't know. But Matt Canada's history as a play caller in college was kind of mixed when it came to utilizing second backs. He did have a year in LSU with Darius Geis and Darrell Williams were his number 1 and 2. And they were pretty close. I mean, Geis was the lead guy, but Darrell Williams had 145 carries in college, which is pretty good. So it's not far-fetched that he can do it. So that's what I like to see. I know I just have to have some like context, but I do agree with this one. I do have him higher than ADP. I don't know how aggressive. I guess where's the cutoff? Would you take him in round 10, 11? Is that where you cut it off? Or are you probably close to where I have him ranked?
I think it depends on your league. If you're still drafting starters, then I wouldn't be. And you're going to be in certain situations. If you've got 3 wide receiver and 2 flex, then you're still drafting starters in the 9th, 10th round region. But if you've got like a small starting lineup, then I'd be happy to start taking them. Basically, it's when you start taking backups. If you're taking backups, he should be the first running backup you take. After guys like, your Rashad Whites and stuff, who in reality are actually starters that you're just putting on your bench. So as soon as you're past the clear starting running backs, I think you need to start considering guys like Warren.
So AJ Dillon or Jaylen Warren?
Warren.
What about David Montgomery?
I take Montgomery because he's really a starter.
Okay.
Though Warren has more upside, I think. Although Montgomery, if Gibbs gets injured, he probably does have pretty solid upside. So I'm still taking Montgomery. He to me is a starter.
Okay. And I'm assuming Khalil Herbert, you'll take Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, because to me, he's the clear starter there. I think that's signaled that Herbert's the starter. So it probably after Herbert, it gets really iffy when you start talking about guys like Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, who in reality you can probably rely on in a week-to-week basis. And they also have upside because if the other one gets injured, then suddenly they're out there on pretty much every snap. So he probably slides in right behind those guys, depending on whether it's PPR or half PPR.
Okay. I was going to Samaje Perine, yes or no? Which one?
I have him in front of Perine now. Now that we know that Williams is near certainly healthy, I think I prefer Williams. Although Perine's very high on my list of backups that I want to have as well.
Gotcha. All right, let's get to this one question. It's about Jonathan Taylor. This season, obviously, with the issue with the contract, I think there's a good spinoff to this because one of the players I had in my list and my honorable mention was Zach Moss. I've kind of taken a flag plant on Zach Moss for the backup RB job. Before he broke his arm, he was, if you read the reports, he was the number one running back. And he also looked very strong the last month of the season last year. I know it's a different coaching staff, but he was the first guy through drills before he broke his arm. The other aspect is he broke his arm. So it's not like he tore his knee or banged up his knee or hurt his ankle. So I like that from a running back perspective. A broken arm, once it's healed, he'll probably be ready to go and take contact. But the JT situation has gotten to a point now where if you're at the 2-3 turn, are you taking him or are you going to take guys like Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley type players, whoever your favorite 2-3 turn guy is? I guess my question for you, Ben, is where do you have JT ranked now? And when are you going to take the risk on him in 2023?
I think it depends on how much you care about your league and why you're playing fantasy football. If you're playing fantasy football to win, you probably want to be taking Jonathan Taylor because if he clicks, he's going to win you your league. If you can get him in the third round, and he's going in the third round in a lot of leagues, he's going to win you your league. He's going to have that upside if things click for him. But the reality is that if something happens where he goes to an offense where he's sharing with like a Dalvin Cook situation where suddenly he's the backup, and I think that's unlikely, but I think it is possible he goes to a committee situation somewhere. If that happens, then all of a sudden it's a wasted pick and it's really hard to come back from there. It's possible it's really hard to come back from. So if you're only playing in one or two leagues where you really care about every league and you don't want to be ruining your draft, then I can understand fading him and maybe going for a wide receiver or something like that instead. But if your goal is purely to win your league and you want to win as many leagues as possible, and if you're like us where you're in 20-something leagues, I think it's worth taking a shot on him whenever he becomes available, especially if the value's right. To me, he's still my running back 8, but that's because I've got him ahead of Josh Jacobs, and I'm not really sure that I should. It's just that we haven't heard anything really clear-cut on either of them. But I feel like if either of them ends up going into the role we expect in their team, then they're a guy you kind of have to have. As for the backups, I don't want any of them. Like Zach Moss is the guy for me. I agree Zach Moss is the backup. But even if he plays as the backup, I still think we'll see Deion Jackson and Evan Hull get touches in the third down area and as change of pace backs. I feel like it will be a real ugly committee situation where Moss is the main guy, but he's realistically only getting about 50% of the touches, and a lot of them won't be the high-value touches. I don't want any of them as backups.
I think he's probably, my thought process maybe like Gus Edwards back in the day. That's what I think Zach Moss would probably be like, not J.K. Dobbins upside, but, I love JB's comment. Just play it around here. Like, we don't play fantasy football to lose. Technically, that is true. That's a good point.
It's funny you say that, but a lot of people do. They play to not lose. Like, they don't care if they win. They just want to be in the hunt the whole time so they can enjoy the season. They don't want to lose too early, I think is the point.
No, I hear you. It's a good point. We're all, technically, any way you want to spin it, totally fine. But I'm going to say the one thing I will say about JT and why I moved him down to, like, the middle of the third round, mostly because I don't see him having that big time upside this year. The Colts are kind of in this transition phase, but also like rookie quarterbacks. We've talked about this a bunch. The last 5 seasons, there's been 16 rookie quarterbacks to play at least 250 snaps. No running back tied to that rookie finishes a top 6 running back in PPR points per game. So he still probably has upside to be an RB1, but I think that's his upside. And I think that's, in that case, I can't justify taking him at the 2-3 turn when guys like Joe Mixon go there, and he's tied to Joe freaking Burrow. And I think, all right, let's go with that guy instead of this. Or if I got T. Higgins, I'm really high on Keenan Allen this year. Like, I feel like at that point, there's still guys that have really good high upside cases. But when I get to like Najee Harris, I'm like, maybe I want Jonathan Taylor instead of Najee Harris. Like, that's where I start thinking about it because JT, in my opinion, has much more upside than Najee. And Najee also has a little bit of floor problem now. If Jaylen Warren, they start giving him more work, that's why I have moved him to like 30 range. But I hear you on that, man. Where do you have like a top 150 rank for him right now off the top of your head?
I tend not to rank players between positions because it's so dependent on your league structure. But within the running backs, it is most certainly like in that area of, do I take him ahead of Ramondre Stevenson? And for me, the answer is maybe, because of Zeke being there. Do I take him in front of Najee Harris? Probably yes. But I at this stage, I think I'm probably going to have to move him behind Joe Mixon. It just feels really awkward having Joe Mixon as my running back 8. That just feels ridiculous to me because he's not running back 8 standard. There's no way he's going to finish in the top 8 running backs. It's just, I don't see there being enough guys that are clearly there that I can rank. So I'm probably taking wide receiver in this range. And if one of them drops out of that tier into where I think I should be taking the next tier, then I'll take whichever one falls.
All right. That's it, folks. That's all we got for today. That's our top 5 must-have running sleepers. I almost said running backs because we're talking about JT. Must-have sleepers in 2023. Ben, before we close out the show, tell the people where they can find your content and what you got coming up on Razzball.com.
Oh, look, we've got heaps of stuff going on. Obviously, if you're still drafting in your leagues and you need help with your rankings, we can help you out. We've got an article on Razzball that gives you a 20% discount on paying for rankings personalized to your league. Heaps of stuff going on Razzball as well with the wide receiver. Looking at my top wide receivers coming out within the next few days. Obviously on Instagram, you can find me at the Fantasy First Down. And if you check out my Instagram, I'm also giving away or auctioning off, I should say, the last spot in our FFD league, which means you can play against me and show me that you're actually better than me. Or maybe not. We'll find out. But you at least have a go. So I'm auctioning that off. That auction finishes in a day. Plus, you can also just check out Razzball, check out all the different stuff I've had going on in Razzball, QB rankings, running back rankings, tight end rankings. Check it all out. There's lots of stuff to find on there.
And make sure you guys jump over to Razzball.com, check out all the great articles, and go check out we have a 3-day free trial for our premium projections model we have in the back end. So go check it out. There is a bunch of posts. You can go to my top 150. There's a link to it right there. Go check out the subscribe to our premium 3-day free trial. Fantastic there. But once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. Go follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. Ben Wasley, thank you for joining. We are out of here.